Peyton Manning is unquestionably one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. He's a 5-time MVP, a 7-time first-team All-Pro, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, and a Super Bowl MVP. Yet Peyton was also a victim of his own greatness. He set the standard so high with his unparalleled dominance in the regular season that many view just 2 Super Bowl wins in 17 seasons as a starter as underachieving. The easy thing to do would be to write off Peyton as a postseason choker while citing his playoff win-loss record and the number of one-and-dones his team had, but that would be lazy. Football is the ultimate team sport, and there is a lot of context that goes into teams winning and losing, especially in the postseason when the sample size is much smaller. This video sets out to explain the real reasons why Peyton Manning didn't win more Super Bowls. After a legendary college career at Tennessee, Peyton Manning was picked first overall in the 1998 NFL Draft by the Indianapolis Colts. He was tasked with resurrecting a once proud franchise that had devolved into a laughingstock over the previous 20 seasons. From 1978 to 1997, only the Buccaneers had a worse winning percentage among non-expansion teams than the Colts. In fact, one could argue that the most memorable accomplishment for the Colts in that time span was when their ex-owner Robert Irsay moved the team out of Baltimore in the middle of the night after the 1983 season. As one might expect from a rookie on a bad team, Peyton struggled early on, throwing 22 interceptions over his first 11 games. However, he began to hit his stride over the final 5 games of the season, putting up comparable numbers to the league's elite. Despite Peyton's individual improvement as the season progressed, the Colts repeated their 3-13 record from the season before. This helped to net them the 4th overall pick in the 1999 NFL Draft, which they used to pick Edgerrin James. Although on-field success had still not come to fruition in the Manning era, the Colts now had the right pieces in place at every skill position to jumpstart what would end up being a decade of incredible success for the franchise. 1999 was a breakout season for both the Colts and Peyton. Manning threw for over 4,000 yards and 26 touchdowns while being named second-team All-Pro. Rookie running back Edgerrin James and wide receiver Marvin Harrison were both named first-team All-Pro. This explosive trio powered the Colts to a 13-3 record and a first-round bye. And although going from 3-13 to 13-3 in just one season is an incredible achievement, 1999 would be the first of many postseason disappointments in the Manning era. Hosting the 13-3 Tennessee Titans in the divisional round, the Colts offense never got going, while the defense had trouble slowing down the Titans' formidable rushing attack, giving up 197 yards to Steve McNair and Eddie George. Peyton's playoff debut was mediocre outside of a late 15-yard touchdown run, but although Peyton was far from perfect, he was not helped by his receivers, suffering several brutal drops in key moments. Peyton led his offense to 16 points on 12 possessions, which, while not impressive, is actually better than Tom Brady's playoff debut of 16 points on 14 possessions. Unfortunately for Peyton, he didn't have a tuck rule to bail him out. The 1999 Colts had a successful season, but with winning comes expectations, and the honeymoon period for Peyton was now over. Playoff success was expected, but for Peyton, said success would take longer than everybody predicted. The 2000 season saw Peyton Manning continue to improve individually. He led the NFL in completions, yards, and touchdowns, once again finishing second-team All-Pro. While Peyton's star burned even brighter, the team's record failed to reflect it. Unlike the 1999 season, which saw the Colts win 13 games and a first-round bye, the 2000 Colts managed to win just 10 games and a wild card spot. In what is a surprise to absolutely nobody, the Colts offense, and Peyton specifically, were forced to carry a subpar defense that ranked 19th in points allowed per drive and 25th in yards allowed per drive. Winning in spite of his defenses would be a recurring theme throughout Peyton's career, as would losing early in the playoffs due to his teammates' incompetence. The 2000 Colts playoff loss to the Dolphins is one of the greater examples of this. Peyton's individual numbers were solid, and they would have been even greater if not for a horrible dropped touchdown by wide receiver Jerome Payton in the second quarter. Nonetheless, the Colts marched to a 14-0 halftime lead, but Dolphins running back Lamar Smith would tear the Colts a new asshole in the second half, finishing the game with 209 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. The Colts had a 17-10 lead with 5 minutes left before their shitty defense finally broke, giving up a 14-play, 80-yard touchdown drive to send the game into overtime. In overtime, Peyton's bad playoff luck would continue. After driving the Colts 51 yards downfield to get into field goal range, the legend of Mike Vanderjagt was born. and this is not a good thing, by the way. Vanderjagt, who was a very good kicker most of the time, including making a 50-yard field goal in the fourth quarter of this game to give the Colts a 7-point lead, missed what was a game-winning 49-yard field goal attempt in overtime. Following this, the Colts defense gave up an 11-play, 61-yard touchdown drive to lose the game. Despite his meteoric rise through the quarterback ranks in just 3 NFL seasons, Peyton now had an 0-2 playoff record, and the longer he would go without winning a playoff game, the more the pressure would continue to build. Coming off of back-to-back one-and-done playoff exits, the Colts entered the 2001 season with renewed vigor, determined not to succumb to the same fate for the third year in a row. And through countless hours of hard work, they accomplished that goal, losing 0 playoff games. And while they didn't lose any playoff games in 2001, they also didn't win any either. That's because they finished 6-10 and didn't even make the fucking playoffs in the first place. The Colts' record regressing was largely due to Peyton individually regressing from his all-pro caliber 1999 and 2000 seasons. It also didn't help matters that their defense finished dead last in points allowed per drive. Peyton's 23 interceptions were a big culprit, and Edgerrin James tearing his ACL in Week 6 didn't help matters either. The fallout ended with Colts firing head coach Jim Mora, playoffs, and bringing in ex-Buccaneers head coach Tony Dungy to help shore up the defense. 4 years had now passed in the Manning era, and the Colts had yet to win a playoff game. People were starting to get impatient, waiting for the savior with an abnormally large forehead to deliver championships to the Hoosier State. 2002 would see the Colts return to the postseason after a disappointing 2001. New head coach / moral authority figure Tony Dungy helped the defense improve from disgustingly bad to just mediocre. Ironically, it was the Colts' offense that regressed this season. Of course, when you're talking about Peyton Manning, this means he was still pretty fucking good. He still threw for 4,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, which are numbers that most quarterbacks in the early 2000s would kill for, and his favorite target, Marvin Harrison, I don't know this Marvin Harrison guy, but he seems like a class act, set the single-season NFL record for receptions with 143. The Colts' main issues offensively came in the red zone, as they finished just 19th in touchdown percentage. Despite a mediocre defense and inconsistent offense, the Colts finished 10-6 and secured a wild card spot on the road against an AFC East opponent, just like 2 seasons earlier. This time, however, they would be taking on the New York Jets, led by breakout star Chad Pennington, whose shoulder just exploded from hearing this. What ensued was unquestionably one of the most shocking playoff games in NFL history. Instead of finally capturing his elusive first career playoff win, Peyton suffered what would end up being the worst loss of his entire career, a 41-0 shellacking. After the Jets took an early 7-0 lead, Peyton led the Colts offense down the field, which ended with Mike Vanderjagt missing a 41-yard field goal. Instead of it being 7-3, Peyton wouldn't touch the ball again until the Colts were down 17-0. Everything that could go wrong for the Colts in that game did go wrong. And Peyton's stat line of no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 31.3 passer rating is pretty indefensible. I will say, though, that Peyton's 2 interceptions came late in the game when it was already way out of reach, and his receivers and his defense certainly didn't help to stop the bleeding. But no matter what excuse you want to come up with, the fact remained that at this point, Peyton was now through 5 NFL seasons and had still not won a playoff game. Peyton now had an 0-3 playoff record, and it would be a painfully long offseason, but a breakthrough was on the horizon. 2003 was officially the beginning of Peyton Manning's prime. He would win the first of his NFL record 5 MVPs, although in this season he would share the award with division rival Steve McNair. Peyton led the league in completions, passing yards, and completion percentage, and the Colts offense was the best in the league in points per drive. Despite another fucking shitty-ass defense, 22nd in points allowed per drive, the Colts finished 12-4 and secured a home wildcard playoff game. The stage was set up perfectly for Peyton to finally break through and quiet his doubters, and he responded in a big way. Peyton shredded the hapless Denver Broncos for 5 touchdowns and a perfect passer rating in a 41-10 win. He would continue his hot streak the next week on the road against the 13-3 Kansas City Chiefs, finishing with 304 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 38-31 win. The Colts didn't punt one time in their first 2 playoff games, and Peyton had almost as many touchdown passes, 8, as incompletions, 12. He was finally performing like the savior everybody anybody expected. But all good things must come to an end eventually, and unfortunately for Peyton and the Colts, the end would be in the AFC Championship game versus New England. New England's number 1 ranked defense lived up to their billing, pressuring Peyton into 4 interceptions and a dreadful 35.5 passer rating. While Peyton's teams might have suffered worse playoff losses in terms of point differential, it's more than fair to say this is Peyton's worst individual performance in a playoff loss. Despite Peyton's 4 interceptions, the Colts unbelievably still had a chance to tie this game late in the fourth quarter, trailing 21-14 with the ball. However, the drive ended up going nowhere, as the Patriots would end up tacking on a field goal to win 24-14. The Colts would complain that the Patriots were being too physical on defense, and as a result, the rules were changed to make it easier for offenses moving forward. In my opinion, Peyton Manning's 2004 season is the greatest season by any quarterback in NFL history. He won his second straight NFL MVP and broke the single-season records for passing touchdowns, passer rating, and adjusted net yards per attempt. He also led the league in yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, and yards per completion for good measure. His 49 touchdowns were even more impressive considering he basically sat out the final game of the season as well as multiple fourth quarters. Despite Peyton's godlike season, the Colts were unable to secure a first-round bye even though they finished with a 12-4 record. A large reason for this was, shockingly, a poor defense, which finished 23rd in points allowed per drive and 31st in yards allowed per drive. For the second year in a row, the Colts would host the Denver Broncos at home in the wildcard round, and once again, Peyton was phenomenal, throwing for 458 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 49-24 win. The Colts' reward for blowing out Denver was a trip to their House of Horrors in New England in a rematch of the previous season's AFC Championship game. It's been said by Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday that football is a game of inches, and the Patriots-Colts rivalry is a great example of this. In their regular season matchups in both 2003 and 2004, the Colts were stopped on the Patriots' 1-yard line in the fourth quarter, trailing by 4 and 3 points respectively. Just for good measure, Mike Vanderjagt choked on a game-tying 48-yard field goal attempt that would have sent the 2004 season opener in overtime. Had the Colts prevailed in those 2 regular season matchups, both of their 2003 and 2004 playoff matchups with New England would have taken place in Indianapolis instead of the frigid cold of Foxborough. Nevertheless, Peyton's playoff demons would once again pop up in this one. New England's defense was ruthless and swarming. The Colts ended up losing 20-3, and Peyton's final numbers weren't good, just 238 yards on 42 attempts and 1 interception. But when you go back and watch this game, it's obvious that Peyton was let down by his teammates in a big way. Once again, Colts receivers and running backs committed several drops and fumbles. Compared to the well-rounded offensive attack of the Patriots, the Colts relied entirely on Peyton's right arm, as their running game with Edgerrin James was non-existent. To make matters worse, the Patriots would go on to win their 3rd Super Bowl in 4 seasons, officially cementing themselves as a dynasty. Some people even began to wonder if Tom Brady was better than Peyton due to his 3-0 lead. You would be forgiven if you thought this was the low point of Peyton's playoff struggles, but you'd be wrong. If you want to pinpoint the exact season when Peyton Manning officially became known as a regular season quarterback, 2005 is the answer. He was once again brilliant in the regular season, being named first-team All-Pro for the 3rd straight season, as well as leading the league in passer rating, net yards per attempt, and adjusted net yards per attempt. The Colts, thanks to a vastly improved defense, finished 14-2 with home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Throughout much of Peyton's career, it was fair to say there were more well-rounded teams standing in his way that prevented him from winning Super Bowls, but 2005 was an exception. The Colts' biggest rival, the Patriots, regressed 10-6 and were eliminated the day before the Colts were set to take on Pittsburgh, a team they had already blown out in the regular season at home in the divisional round. The path to capturing that elusive Super Bowl was right there for Peyton, and the Colts completely shit their pants. In what is unquestionably the biggest missed opportunity of Peyton's career, the Colts fell to the eventual champion Steelers by a score of 21-18. For 3 quarters, the Colts offense was non-existent, trailing 21-3 heading into the 4th. In the final quarter, Peyton finally woke up, throwing a long touchdown pass to Dallas Clark to cut it to 21-10. After a defensive stop, Peyton got the ball back, but was bailed out by a questionable call ruling that overturned an apparent Troy Polamalu interception. Nevertheless, Peyton capitalized on this second chance, and the Colts once again scored a touchdown along with a 2-point conversion to cut the score to 21-18. After another defensive stop, the Colts got the ball back with 2:31 remaining, but the Steelers' defense was ready. They sacked Manning twice, including on 4th down, to take over at the Colts' 2-yard line with 1:20 remaining. Then, shit got wild. Morbidly obese Steelers running back Jerome Bettis got the handoff and fumbled. The ball was picked up by Colts cornerback Nick Harper, who had been stabbed by his wife in the fucking leg just a day prior. Instead of running to the sidelines to guarantee a score, Harper ran straight forward, giving world-famous woman respecter Ben Roethlisberger a chance to tackle him. The Colts now had the ball at their own 42 with a minute left. Peyton connected with Reggie Wayne for 22 yards and Marvin Harrison for 8 yards on the next 2 plays to get into field goal range. With 21 seconds remaining, Mike Vanderjagt walked onto the field for the game-tying field goal attempt. He missed it. The Colts' dream season was over, and Peyton was officially known as a playoff choker. Through this point of his career, there was some merit to the label. Peyton had some truly awful performances on his resume, but he had also been let down repeatedly in big spots by his teammates. That would change the following season. The 2006 season saw more of the same for the Colts. They won a lot of regular season games thanks to another brilliant season from Peyton to cover up a horrible defense. Peyton was not named first-team All-Pro for the 4th straight year, despite leading the league in touchdown passes, passer rating, and adjusted net yards per attempt. The Colts finished 12-4 and secured a wild-card spot, but there was no indication that this was going to be the year they finally broke through to win it all. However, once the playoffs began, it was the Colts' defense that did the heavy lift. The Colts dispatched Kansas City at home 28-3 before traveling to Baltimore in the divisional round. There, they vanquished the Ravens in an ugly 15-6 win. Peyton's performances in these 2 games were really bad, but nevertheless, the Colts would play host to their hated rival New England in the AFC Championship game. Peyton's shitty play continued in the first half, including a brutal pick 6 to put the Colts down 21-3. What happened afterwards was what many considered to be the best moment of Peyton's career. He led a ferocious second half comeback to finally vanquish the Patriots and advance to his first Super Bowl. In Super Bowl 41, Peyton would face another dominant defense in Chicago, but Chicago was held back by an anemic offense. What else is new? And Peyton performed solidly to guide the Colts to a 29-17 win and his first Super Bowl ring. For his efforts, Peyton was given Super Bowl MVP. Thanks to some clutch throws, dominant defensive support, and some old-fashioned dumb luck, Peyton had now checked off the last box on his resume and officially cemented himself as an NFL legend. But unless you're Tom Brady, good luck doesn't last forever, as Peyton would come to find out firsthand. Fresh off of his first Super Bowl victory and getting the proverbial monkey off of his back, Peyton had arguably his most complete team in 2007. The Colts, armed with Peyton's usual offensive brilliance, continued their great defensive performance from the 2006 playoffs, finishing 4th in points allowed per drive. Overall, they would finish 13-3 and secure a first-round bye. But as the 2006 Colts defense showed, how a unit performs in the regular season does not always carry over to the playoffs. The Colts played host to a mercurial but talented San Diego Chargers squad in the divisional round, and an AFC Championship game rematch between the Colts and the undefeated Patriots in Foxborough was nearly guaranteed, but it was not to be for Indianapolis. Peyton threw for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, but was hurt by a fluke interception on the Chargers' 2-yard line, another interception that went through Reggie Wayne's hands inside the Chargers' 35-yard line, a Marvin Harrison fumble inside the Chargers' 25-yard line, and his defense giving up a 78-yard touchdown drive to Chargers backup quarterback Billy Volek in the 4th quarter, which undid a go-ahead touchdown pass by Peyton earlier in the quarter. Peyton had 2 drives late to try and retake the lead, but the first drive stalled inside the Chargers' 7-yard line after 70 yards, and the second ended with Dallas Clark dropping a 4th down pass that hit him in the hands. While it is unlikely the Colts would have beaten the 17-0 Patriots on the road in the AFC Championship game, this was still another extremely disappointing one-and-done season for a team that had Peyton Manning in his prime. I mean, really though, Billy Volek? You let Billy Volek drive for a 78-yard touchdown on you at home in the 4th quarter of a playoff game? Give me a fucking break. For years with Peyton Manning at quarterback, the Colts churned out regular season wins with ease, but the 2008 season saw the franchise actually struggle out of the gate. Thanks to Peyton having off-season surgery, he didn't play in any preseason games and was uncharacteristically rusty to start the season, throwing just 10 touchdowns and 9 interceptions through 7 games. Not surprisingly, the Colts went just 3-4 in those contests. However, Peyton's greatness could not be held down forever, as over the last 9 weeks of the season he threw for 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and an excellent 109.7 passer rating. The Colts ran off 9 straight wins to finish the year at 12-4. Peyton was named first-team All-Pro and won his 3rd MVP award for his effort, although it was more due to a lack of great QB play across the league instead of jaw-dropping numbers like his 2004 season. Despite the Colts' 12-4 record, they didn't win their division, and therefore they had to play a road wildcard game against the 8-8 San Diego Chargers, giving the team a chance to avenge their playoff loss from the year before. In the game, Peyton had several dropped interceptions and was not as sharp as he was over the last 9 games of the regular season. To say he was why the Colts lost would be inaccurate though, as a multitude of reasons factored in. Peyton had several amazing throws, including a great 72-yard touchdown pass to Reggie Wayne while the Chargers defense was napping to go up 17-14 in the 3rd quarter. He ended the game with 310 yards, a touchdown, 0 interceptions, and a 90.4 passer rating. Not spectacular, but respectable. One of the most overlooked aspects of this game was how the Colts had historically awful starting field position. Out of their 10 offensive drives, 5 started inside of their own 10-yard line, and 8 started inside of their own 21-yard line. In addition to this, Colts rookie tight end Bijan Robinson forgot the snap count on a crucial 3rd and 2 with 2 minutes remaining, which, if the Colts converted, would have won them the game. Robinson's error resulted in Chargers linebacker Tim Dobbins getting a clear pass to Peyton, who was sacked on the Colts' 1-yard line. The Colts punted and allowed Darren Sproles to return the ball to their 38-yard line. With 33 seconds left, the Chargers kicked a field goal to tie it at 17 to send the game into overtime. In overtime, the Chargers won the toss and scored on their opening drive to win the game 23-17. Peyton was never given a chance to touch the ball, and now another season of his prime had gone down the drain. 2009 saw Peyton Manning continue his standard of excellence. He was named first-team All-Pro for the 5th time and NFL MVP for the 4th time after throwing for 4,500 yards and 33 touchdowns. Manning was particularly deadly in the clutch, leading the league in 4th-quarter comebacks and game-winning drives. The Colts finished 14-2 and had home field advantage throughout the playoffs. They famously had a chance at going 16-0 before head coach/mannequin Jim Caldwell decided to pull the starters in the second half of game number 15 against the Jets. Unlike 1999, 2005, and 2007 when the Colts went one and done after getting a first-round bye, the 2009 edition took advantage of it. Thanks to a steady performance from Peyton and a dominant defensive performance, the Colts banished the Ravens 20-3 in the divisional round before playing host to the upstart Jets in the AFC Championship game. The Colts started slow, falling behind 17-6 late in the first half to the same team they had helped get into the playoffs by pulling their starters against just a month prior. Then, Peyton caught fire and ended up having an absolutely stellar game, finishing with 377 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Colts grounded the Jets 30-17 to advance to their 2nd Super Bowl in 4 seasons. This time, their opponent would be the New Orleans Saints, a team famous for respecting opponents' well-being. Peyton was being talked up as the best quarterback of all time heading into the game, and for 3 quarters, he played worthy of the moniker. He was throwing dimes and steadily moving the offense down the field with consistency. It was only through the shortcomings of his teammates that the Colts only had a 17-16 lead to start the 4th quarter. Of course, people only remember one throw from this game. Peyton, after being money in clutch situations all year long, threw a terrible 74-yard pick 6 to Tracy Porter on a slant pattern to Reggie Wayne, who ran a horrible route on the play, by the way. This sealed the game, and the Colts lost 31-17. Super Bowl 44 sums up the Peyton playoff conundrum pretty well. Unlike Tom Brady with the Patriots or Montana with the 49ers back in the 1980s, Peyton's team almost always needed him to play flawless to win. He didn't have the extreme margin for error that quarterbacks on dynasties have had. Everybody remembers the interception, but they forget about Pierre Garçon dropping a potential touchdown on 3rd down in the 2nd quarter, Colts running back Mike Hart not being able to convert a 3rd and 1 run on another 2nd quarter drive, Hank Baskett botching an onside kick to start the 3rd quarter, and Matt Stover missing a 51-yard field goal early in the 4th. In addition, the Colts defense was shredded by Drew Brees all night, who completed 82% of his throws for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns. Peyton was still the best quarterback in the NFL, but he wasn't the quarterback in the best situation. Nobody knew it at the time, but the 2010 season would be the last time Peyton Manning suited up in a Colts uniform. Thanks to a rapidly accelerating neck problem, Peyton's arm strength strength, which was never elite to begin with, had become noticeably weaker. As a result of this, as well as injuries to key Colts players, Peyton saw a big step back in efficiency. Of course, this is Peyton Manning we're talking about, so a step back still means he threw for 4,700 yards and 33 touchdowns. But he also threw for 17 interceptions and averaged the lowest yards per attempt since his rookie season. 2010 was also the first time since 2002 where the Colts didn't win at least 12 games. And just like in 2002, they finished 10-6 and got to face the New York Jets in the wildcard round. However, unlike that 2002 matchup, this took place in Indianapolis. In what would end up being Peyton's final game in a Colts uniform, the Colts lost 17-16. The defense struggled to get off the field on third down, giving Peyton just 8 offensive possessions to work with all game. Of those 8 possessions, 4 ended after the Colts were unable to successfully convert 3rd and 1. Like many previous playoff defeats, the Colts offense was given horrible average starting field position all game long. Despite these handicaps, Peyton performed well, throwing 225 yards and a touchdown for a 108.7 passer rating, although he attempted just 26 passes. The Colts offense had just 3 drives in the second half, scoring field goals on all of them. Peyton's last offensive possession in a Colts uniform started on his own 20 with just under 3 minutes left in the game. He led the team 48 yards downfield into field goal range, where Adam Vinatieri came through in the clutch once again with a 50-yard field goal to put the Colts ahead 16-14 with 57 seconds left. Like many times before, Peyton's team will let him down with the game in the balance. The Colts kickoff team immediately allowed a 47-yard return to set up the Jets with amazing field position. Colts head coach / Weekend at Bernie's impersonator Jim Caldwell mysteriously called a timeout with 28 seconds left, which gave the Jets more time to compose themselves. And the defense allowed 3 Mark Sanchez completions for 38 yards to set up Nick Folk for the chip shot 32-yard game-winning field goal. Following the playoff loss to the Jets in 2010, Peyton Manning had major neck surgery, which would end up costing him the entire 2011 season. Unlike certain quarterbacks who play on teams good enough to win 11 games without them, the Colts bottomed out, going 2-14 and securing the first overall pick. With that pick, they took highly touted Stanford quarterback Andrew Luck, and Peyton was discarded like I was in my last marriage. As a free agent, Peyton would sign with the Denver Broncos, and he would quickly put any concerns about whether he would return from such a major injury to rest. He was once again brilliant in 2012, throwing for almost 4,700 yards, 37 touchdowns, and leading the league in completion percentage, net yards per attempt, and adjusted net yards per attempt. He was named first-team All-Pro for a 6th time, and he should have won MVP, but instead it was given to notable child respecter Adrian Peterson. The Broncos finished 13-3 and secured the first seed in the AFC, but if you believe Peyton Manning was born with bad luck, the Broncos' playoff game versus the Ravens in the 2012 divisional round is a very compelling argument. The game would actually start off well, with Peyton benefiting from a 90-yard punt return touchdown. However, his defense would immediately give back those points by giving up a 59-yard touchdown pass. On Peyton's first offensive possession, a blatantly missed defensive pass interference resulted in the Ravens getting a pick 6. Peyton would respond with 2 touchdown passes before his defense gave up another 32-yard touchdown pass just before halftime after the Broncos had missed a 52-yard field goal. The Broncos returned the opening second half kickoff 104 yards to go up 28-21 before Peyton's defense gave up another touchdown just before the third quarter ended. The fourth quarter started with the score tied at 28, and Peyton would go on to lead the Broncos on an 88-yard touchdown drive, which ended with him throwing a 17-yard touchdown pass to Demaryius Thomas to give the Broncos a 35-28 lead. The Broncos defense would hold the Ravens on their next possession, and the Broncos would wind the clock down to a minute before punting the ball back to the Ravens deep in their own territory with 0 timeouts left. So far, you might say Peyton hasn't been that unfortunate in this game, but what happened next would put any counter-argument to rest. On 3rd and 3 from the Patriots' 30-yard line with 40 seconds left, the Broncos gave up a 70-yard touchdown pass, tying the game at 35 and sending it into overtime. In overtime, the teams would trade possessions, and Peyton would end up throwing a brutal interception, which would ultimately help the Ravens win the game 38-35 in double overtime. Much like his Super Bowl loss to the Saints a few years prior, Peyton was very good in this game outside of one throw. But I'm sorry, there's just no way he should have even been in the position to throw a game-losing interception in overtime. This loss is on the Broncos defense and Raheem Moore specifically. This was the second time in Peyton's career where he threw a go-ahead touchdown fourth quarter pass in a game he ultimately ended up losing. Along with 2005, 2012 would go down as one of Peyton Manning's biggest missed opportunities, and time was quickly running out for him. Peyton's 2013 season is widely considered one of the greatest individual seasons seasons by a quarterback in NFL history, and for good reason. Peyton broke the single-season record for touchdown passes again, and also set NFL records for most passing yards in a season while leading the league in net yards per attempt. He coasted to his 7th All-Pro nod and 5th NFL MVP. Thanks to Peyton's brilliance, the Broncos broke the single-season record for points, and once again finished 13-3 with the first seed in the AFC. Unlike 2012, the Broncos would not go one and done in the playoffs. First, holding off a feisty San Diego Chargers team 24-17 in the divisional round before getting to face the hated New England Patriots in the AFC Championship game. In the 2013 AFC Championship game, Peyton would put up a masterful performance, going 13 of 43 for 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Broncos won 26-16, and the game wasn't nearly as close as the final score would suggest. They advanced to Super Bowl 48 to play against the Seattle Seahawks. Literally from the very first play, a botched snap that traveled over Peyton Manning's head for a safety, the Denver Broncos completely imploded. The Seahawks added a field goal to go up 5-0. The Broncos went 3 and out. The Seahawks added another field goal to go up 8-0. Then Peyton threw an ugly interception that set Seattle up in great field position, which they capitalized on with a touchdown to go up 15-0 early in the second quarter. The Broncos looked to have finally settled down, with Peyton driving the team into Seattle territory before he was hit in motion on a 3rd and 13 throw. The ball popped into the air into Malcolm Smith's hands. He's a Seattle linebacker, and he returned it 69 yards, for a touchdown to go up 22-0. The Broncos got another drive before halftime, but turned it over on downs. Any chance of a Denver comeback ended on the opening second half kickoff, as Percy Harvin returned it 87 yards to put Seattle up 29-0. The rest of the game was just garbage time, and the Broncos' first second half drive stalled out again near midfield. Their next possession ended with Demaryius Thomas fumbling near Seattle's red zone. The Seahawks took the ball and marched downfield to go up 36-0. The Broncos would finally get on the board with a touchdown throw from Peyton to Demaryius Thomas on the last play of the third quarter, as well as a 2-point conversion to make it 36-8, but the fourth quarter only saw Seattle add another touchdown to make the final score 43-8. Peyton didn't play well, but outside of his first interception, it's hard to say he did anything to lose the game for Denver. When your defense can't stop the other offense, your special teams gives up a long touchdown, your offensive line fails to block anybody, your running backs don't do anything, and your receivers can't get separation, I'm not sure any quarterback could have beaten Seattle that night. The 2014 season started off like most Peyton Manning seasons, with him putting up godly numbers. Through 7 games, the Broncos were 6-1, and Peyton had thrown for 22 touchdowns and 3 interceptions for a 119 passer rating. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. Peyton's decision-making noticeably declined over the last 9 games, throwing for just 17 touchdowns and 12 interceptions with a mediocre 88.7 passer rating. And over the last 5 games of the season, it was even worse. Peyton threw just 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions for a dreadful 78.7 passer rating. Thanks to an improved rushing attack, however, the Broncos still finished 12-4 and got a first-round bye, but Peyton was clearly not himself. In the divisional round, the Broncos would face the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know if you know this, but Peyton used to play for them. The hope for Denver was that Peyton's second half of the season was just a mirage, and early on in the game, it looked like it was. On the Broncos' opening drive, Peyton looked razor sharp, leading the team on a 68-yard touchdown drive, but that was as good as it got all game. For the rest of the afternoon, Peyton was just bad, missing countless throws he would normally make. The Broncos' defense played well enough to win, but it was all for naught. The game was 14-10 at halftime, and still just a one-score game at 21-13 early in the fourth, but Peyton and the offense never got it going. The Colts would end up winning 24-13, and it was later revealed that Peyton was playing through a torn quad. While I don't doubt the quad had some impact on Peyton, it would be pretty weak to excuse his entire performance based on that. Along with his 2003 AFC Championship game loss, this was the most disappointing playoff performance of Peyton's career, because unlike many of his other playoff defeats, he was the main culprit. His running game was solid, his defense was solid, and his receivers were open enough for plays to be made. Peyton just didn't make them. I might even argue it's the worst playoff loss of his career, considering it was at home and in decent weather against a good but not great defense, unlike the 2003 AFC Championship game, which was on the road in the snow against a dominant defense. When people argue that Peyton isn't the best quarterback ever, it's games like this that they can stake their case on. It turns out Peyton's decline in the second half of 2014 wasn't a blip, as he was flat out atrocious during the entire 2015 season, throwing for 9 touchdowns and 17 interceptions for a Jamarcus Russell-esque 67.9 passer rating. Fortunately for Peyton, the Broncos had a dominant defense to cover up his subpar play, going 7-2 in his 9 starts. Peyton's durability also came into question in 2015 as he missed almost half the season with a bad foot. Thanks to the Broncos defense, the team still finished 12-4 and got the first seed in the AFC. Peyton won his starting job back from Brock Osweiler in the final week of the regular season. I say won in air quotes. Despite having the first seed, nobody had any confidence in the Broncos going far in the playoffs with Manning at the helm, and it's hard to blame them. And yet, that's exactly what they did. Peyton embraced the game manager role as somebody who stayed out of the way and let his defense do the heavy lifting. So the question remains, why did Peyton Manning not win more Super Bowls? As this video showed, there are many factors. To say Peyton didn't win more because he sucked in the playoffs is wrong. A bad postseason quarterback doesn't have games like Peyton's perfect passer rating versus the Broncos in 2003, or his 304-yard, 3-touchdown game versus the 13-3 Chiefs in 2003, or his 458-yard, 4-touchdown game against the Broncos in 04, or his classic second-half comeback in the 06 AFC Championship game versus New England, or even his 377-yard, 3-touchdown game versus the Jets' #1 ranked defense in the 2009 AFC Championship game, or his ridiculous 400-yard game versus New England in the 2013 AFC Championship game. But those types of masterful performances weren't as common in the playoffs as you would expect from a guy who won 5 MVPs and 7 first-team All-Pro nods. He never had a great Super Bowl performance, and his numbers in his 2 Super Bowl winning postseasons are bad. A career playoff record of 14-13 is mediocre, but of those 13 playoff losses, in my opinion, only 2003 and 2014 fall on Peyton's shoulders. Those are the only 2 games where Peyton's teammates did enough to win, but Peyton's subpar play sunk the team. Then there are the complete team failures, where Peyton didn't play well, but the rest of his team was so bad it wouldn't have even mattered, like in 2002 versus the Jets and Super Bowl 48 versus the Seahawks. Then you have the losses to teams who were more well-rounded than Peyton's Colts, like the 99 Titans, 04 Patriots, and 09 Saints. Then you have what I believe to be the biggest reason Peyton only won 2 rings: bad luck. 4 times Peyton's team blew the lead in the final 40 seconds of a game. 2000 versus the Dolphins, 2008 versus the Chargers, 2010 versus the Jets, and 2012 versus the Ravens. Add up all of these things, and is it really surprising that Peyton didn't win more? I don't think so. I don't believe Peyton to be the best quarterback of all time, but he's definitely better than Tom Brady. Fuck Tom Brady.